Some people speak with unwavering certainty about things they barely understand. They explain complex topics with confidence that feels strangely disproportionate to their knowledge. Others listen quietly, sensing something is off, but unable to name it. The speaker never hesitates, never doubts, never pauses to reconsider details. At first, this seems like arrogance or ignorance working together. But the mind may be doing something far more protective beneath that certainty. You may have noticed this pattern in others without recognizing its presence within yourself. What looks like overconfidence may begin somewhere deeper than personality. There is a familiar social moment when someone explains a subject with impressive certainty, yet shallow understanding. The confidence arrives before the knowledge has fully formed. Listeners often sense the gap instinctively, though the speaker appears completely unaware of it. This mismatch feels uncomfortable but strangely common in everyday conversations. The behavior is usually labeled as foolishness or inflated ego, yet the psychological process underneath is more complex and less intentional. Evolutionary psychologists suggest the brain prioritizes emotional stability over accurate self-assessment in uncertain environments. Confidence, even misplaced confidence, helps reduce internal anxiety when facing situations that feel intellectually threatening. What appears to be ignorance may actually be a protective mechanism designed to prevent feelings of inadequacy from surfacing. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that the psyche defends itself against perceived weakness long before conscious reasoning intervenes. Admitting uncertainty requires the mind to tolerate vulnerability, which can feel psychologically unsafe in many situations. So the brain creates a quick internal shortcut. It replaces doubt with certainty before discomfort becomes noticeable. This is not deliberate deception. It is a fast, automatic preservation of self-image happening beneath awareness. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner noted that behaviors reducing internal tension tend to repeat without needing conscious intention. When someone feels unsure but speaks confidently, the tension disappears almost instantly, reinforcing the pattern. Over time, this creates a habit of expressing certainty in areas where actual competence is still developing. The person genuinely believes they understand more than they do because the mind shields them from recognizing the gap. This is where the Dunning-Kruger pattern begins, not as stupidity, but as emotional self-protection. Moments that should trigger self-reflection are quietly replaced with reassuring internal narratives of capability. A person may walk away from a discussion feeling knowledgeable, while others sensed major oversimplifications. The mismatch rarely feels obvious to the speaker because their internal experience feels coherent and stable. Psychoanalyst Erikson described identity as something the mind continuously protects from threats to self-worth. Recognizing one's own ignorance can feel like a threat to identity, especially in social or professional settings. So the mind avoids that threat by inflating perceived understanding just enough to restore psychological balance. This inflation is subtle. It does not feel like exaggeration, but like genuine comprehension. You may have observed this pattern in conversations where explanations felt confident, yet strangely hollow. The speaker is not trying to mislead others. They are trying to protect themselves from internal discomfort. What looks like intellectual overreach is often emotional self-preservation operating invisibly. This is where the pattern quietly reshapes how people see their own abilities. And to understand why the mind learned to protect itself this way, it becomes necessary to look much earlier in development.
If you're still watching, you probably notice things most people miss. You question behavior, you look beneath the surface. If that sounds like you, subscribe. This channel was made for minds like yours.
Long before people learn to evaluate their own knowledge, they learn to avoid feelings that threaten their sense of worth. A child who feels confused rarely says, "I don't understand." The feeling is uncomfortable and difficult to tolerate. Instead, the child often imitates certainty, repeating phrases or ideas without fully grasping their meaning. Caregivers sometimes reward this appearance of understanding because it signals learning, confidence, and quick adaptation. Over time, the brain associates certainty with safety and confusion with subtle emotional risk. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that early humans who displayed confidence were more likely to maintain status within social groups. Status often meant protection, resources, and belonging, making confident behavior deeply advantageous for survival. The mind learns early that appearing knowledgeable can prevent social rejection and preserve connection. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that the psyche builds defenses long before a person can consciously recognize them. One of these defenses is replacing the discomfort of uncertainty with the relief of assumed understanding. Children also learn from observing adults who speak confidently even when they lack full information. This modeling teaches that certainty is socially acceptable, while visible doubt may invite criticism or dismissal. School environments reinforce this pattern when quick answers are rewarded more than thoughtful hesitation. Students who respond rapidly are often perceived as smarter than those who pause to reflect. The brain quietly notes this social pattern and internalizes it as a strategy for approval. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner noted that reinforced behaviors become automatic long before conscious awareness develops. Each time confidence reduces embarrassment or gains approval, the pattern strengthens internally. By adolescence, this defense operates smoothly, shaping how individuals present their understanding to others. Moments of confusion are quickly covered by statements that feel plausible enough to restore emotional comfort. Psychoanalyst Erikson described identity as fragile during development, easily threatened by perceived incompetence. To protect this developing identity, the mind learns to interpret partial knowledge as sufficient understanding. The person begins believing they grasp subjects fully because acknowledging gaps feels psychologically unsafe. This belief is not fabricated intentionally. It is constructed by years of reinforced emotional learning. As adults, people rarely question this pattern because it feels like normal confidence rather than distortion. The mind continues using certainty as a shield against the discomfort of not knowing. This explains why individuals may feel intellectually secure even when their understanding remains incomplete. The internal goal is not accuracy, but emotional stability and preservation of self-image. What begins as a childhood coping strategy quietly becomes an adult cognitive habit. And once this habit enters complex social environments, it begins expressing itself in ways others can clearly observe. In casual conversations, someone may dominate discussions on topics they recently encountered, speaking with striking authority and little hesitation. Others sense the surface-level grasp, yet the speaker's confidence makes interruption feel socially uncomfortable or unnecessary. This is where the pattern quietly reshapes everyday interaction without appearing intentionally misleading or arrogant. Among friends, people often explain advice with certainty, even when their personal experience is limited or secondhand. The tone feels reassuring, which makes the advice easier to accept despite its shallow foundation. In families, older siblings or relatives sometimes speak with authority on matters they only partially understand. Younger members may interpret this confidence as wisdom, reinforcing the speaker's perceived competence. At workplaces, the effect becomes especially visible during meetings, presentations, and decision-making discussions. An employee may present ideas confidently while overlooking important complexities that others silently notice. The delivery often matters more socially than the depth of analysis behind the statements. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner noted that social reinforcement strengthens behaviors that appear effective, even when accuracy is secondary. Colleagues may interpret confidence as leadership potential, further rewarding the internal pattern. During disagreements, individuals often defend their position with unwavering certainty rather than thoughtful reconsideration. This certainty protects them from the discomfort of admitting incomplete understanding in front of others. Psychoanalyst Erikson described how identity shifts depending on social roles, guided by internal self-perception. Someone who sees themselves as knowledgeable will unconsciously speak in ways that maintain that image. Moments requiring humility feel psychologically threatening, so the mind replaces them with firm assertions. Different people notice this pattern in different moments. Sharing observations sometimes helps others recognize it too. In social environments, confident speech often draws attention, while careful hesitation can be overlooked or undervalued. This imbalance encourages people to favor certainty over reflection during public exchanges. Power dynamics intensify the effect when authority figures speak beyond their expertise without realizing it. Listeners may assume competence simply because of the speaker's position, not the content of their words. The pattern also appears online, where brief exposure to information quickly becomes the basis for strong opinions. A person reads a summary article and soon speaks as if they understand the entire subject deeply. The internal experience feels genuine because the mind equates familiarity with mastery. What looks like intellectual overreach is often emotional protection playing out in social space. These moments accumulate, shaping how individuals are perceived and how they perceive themselves. And when modern environments begin rewarding this pattern at a larger scale, its influence quietly expands. Modern culture quietly favors confidence over careful understanding in ways that feel almost invisible. Short videos, headlines, and summaries allow people to feel informed without engaging deeply with complexity. This environment rewards quick opinions delivered with certainty rather than slow, uncertain reflection. What once required years of study can now feel graspable after minutes of exposure. The mind interprets this accessibility as genuine comprehension, reinforcing internal assumptions of competence. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner noted that rewarded behaviors strengthen rapidly, especially when rewards arrive consistently. Likes, shares, and agreement from others act as subtle reinforcement for confident expression. The person begins associating certainty with social approval and intellectual validation. Online discussions rarely allow space for thoughtful hesitation without being perceived as weakness or ignorance. As a result, individuals learn to present opinions firmly even when understanding remains partial. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that the psyche seeks stability, especially in environments filled with overwhelming information. Certainty becomes an anchor in a sea of complexity, helping the mind feel oriented and secure. News cycles, debates, and commentary culture further normalize speaking beyond one's depth of knowledge. People hear others doing it constantly, which makes the behavior feel ordinary rather than exceptional. Professional environments also amplify this by rewarding those who sound decisive during uncertainty. Decisiveness often appears more valuable than cautious evaluation in fast-paced organizational settings. Over time, people internalize the idea that sounding sure is more important than being accurate. This creates a quiet drift where perceived understanding grows, while actual comprehension remains limited. What looks harmless here carries a hidden cost later. The gap between confidence and competence widens without being noticed by the person experiencing it. Social systems continue reinforcing the pattern, making it feel both normal and beneficial. The mind receives constant confirmation that its protective shortcut is effective in modern life. This reinforcement reduces opportunities for genuine self-assessment and reflective doubt. As this gap widens across years, the individual becomes increasingly certain about increasingly shallow knowledge. And eventually, a subtle awareness begins to form when this certainty meets situations it cannot comfortably explain. There are quiet moments when a person encounters information that does not fit their confident understanding. The discomfort feels unfamiliar, not because the topic is complex, but because certainty begins to feel fragile. What once felt obvious now carries a faint sense of internal tension that is difficult to explain. The mind senses a gap it has long protected itself from noticing. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that the psyche resists recognizing its own defenses, preferring the comfort they provide. This resistance makes awareness feel unsettling rather than clarifying. A person may begin noticing that explanations they once gave easily now feel harder to justify. The words still come, but they feel less solid, as if resting on unstable ground. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner noted that internal patterns persist longest when they successfully reduce psychological discomfort. Here, the pattern begins to falter because it can no longer fully remove the discomfort it was designed to prevent. Psychoanalyst Erikson described identity as something continuously preserved through internal narratives of competence. When those narratives weaken, the sense of self feels slightly exposed and uncertain. This exposure is rarely dramatic. It appears as small hesitations where certainty once flowed effortlessly. A person may sense they know less than they thought, yet struggle to articulate what changed. The mind continues trying to restore its protective confidence, but the effort feels more noticeable. Moments of silence replace immediate explanations during conversations that once felt easy to navigate. This shift does not feel like growth. It feels like a quiet disturbance in familiar mental patterns. Different people carry this awareness privately, often without discussing it openly. A shared, unspoken recognition sometimes exists that certainty is not as reliable as it once seemed. What was believed to be knowledge begins to feel like a story told for emotional safety. Yet the mind still prefers that story to the discomfort of fully confronting its limitations. There is a tension between wanting clarity and needing psychological stability. This tension remains unresolved because both impulses are deeply human and deeply protective. A person continues speaking, thinking, and remembering through patterns shaped long before awareness arrived. And somewhere beneath that confident surface, a quieter understanding waits without demanding to be heard.